Welcome everybody, and this is from Plein Air to the Studio number 3. And basically what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go through the process of how I took this from a plein air painting to the way it looks now, my finished piece that I worked on in the studio. So, hey everybody, I'm Ken Brant, and I'm an artist. So welcome to another part of this particular series from Plein Air to the Studio. And this particular painting that I did plein air, I did this in Italy, and it's the falls in the Vallombrosa forest. And I'm not really 100% sure if there's a name for this fall. I'm calling it the waterfall. I'm calling it the Vallombrosa waterfalls. If you Google it, I think you might get a picture of this. I'm not 100% sure, but I did find a photograph of this online, and it says it's in the Vallombrosa forest. Therefore, I'm naming it Vallombrosa waterfalls. So the original waterfall, while we were there painting, did not have this much water falling down the falls. So I used my imagination and added that water. And I'm going to show you how I did that. But first I'm going to explain the linen board that I'm using is a Raymar L64C, and basically this particular linen board, it's Belgian linen, it's quadruple oil primed, and it's a really super smooth surface. These are the boards I prefer to use when I'm painting. These are great for portraiture. They're great for, I find them great for everything. And I did not spare any expense when I went to Italy. I used about 15 of these boards to do my paintings on, and they are a bit expensive. I did pay about $27 a piece for these. So when I use them, I'm expecting to have a really nice painting that I'm putting on them, and I don't waste them. If I do a painting on them and then I don't like how it turns out, I will remove that painting and I will start over, because this is a good board and I would never waste it. So let's go on in the video and you can watch this process of me making this painting into what it has become. Okay, so basically I started with this painting. As you can see it now, there is not much as far as waterfall coming down there. In fact, when we were there painting, there wasn't any water coming down those falls. It was just a trickle. So what you're seeing here is I'm adding some details using white charcoal pencil, and that pencil is a General's charcoal white pencil, number 558, and you can pick that up at pretty much any art store. I believe I got these at Michael's, and they're pretty good. I like to use the white charcoal because they really leave a nice impression onto the over the paint when I'm writing onto the canvas, and I can see it, and it doesn't affect the oil paint at all. I have heard that if you use a graphite pencil over a period of time, the graphite will bleed through the oil paint and you can see it. I've never seen any evidence of this in a painting, in either any of my paintings that I've used a pencil on, or in someone else's painting that they've used pencil on. I've never actually seen it, but I have heard it will happen. So for that reason, I will tend to stay away from the use of a graphite pencil when I'm drawing onto the canvas or over the top of my painting. It's just figure, you know, why take the chance, you know, to have that bleed through at a later date, and especially if you sell that painting to somebody and it's sitting in their house and all of a sudden they start seeing these lines that weren't there before. That would probably not be good. So yeah, here I am putting in the darker shades within the painting itself there. I really didn't when I did this in plein air, it was very light, and that tends to happen you know, depending on whether you're in a shaded area or a sunlit area. When you're outdoors painting, your painting can either come up dark or it can come up light. This particular case, I thought it was a bit light, so I'm putting in much darker areas, and then I went right ahead and, as you can see here, I put in where I wanted my focal point to be, and it's going to be like that. I wanted that glow in the background through the trees, and right there at that right above where the waterfall is. So I put that light area in there immediately after I put in my dark area. So I put in my darkest dark and I put in my lightest light, and from there I can kind of base the rest of my values that I'll be using for the painting. So here I am putting in some skylight areas, or at least where I would like them to be, and because I just have a photo. I did take a photo of this area on the day that we were painting there, so I have that as a reference, and I'm also using when I'm, you know, the painting itself, which captured the essence of the area that I was that we were there painting. So I wanted to, between the two of them, you know, what I'm seeing and the photo and what I already have on the painting, I'm kind of using my mind to place the skylights and the trees and the branches in these areas that that I think are going to be good for the composition. I don't want to copy off of the photo at all. You know, I just want to use the photo as, there's like, for example, that rocky area on the left hand side of the falls. It does exist, but it doesn't look anything like what I have there in my painting now. And so, you know, I'm just kind of using it as a reference, and that's, I highly recommend that you know, when you do a plein air painting and you do take a photo of the area, which I think everybody should do that. You definitely should take a photo, especially for the areas, like for example, the way the sunlight is hitting certain areas of the scene in front of you. If there's aspects of that that you like, you would want to capture that, because your memory of that, it may not be exactly how you see it. You got to remember, what happens in nature is always going to be so spectacular and wonderful compared to what we ourselves could possibly imagine. So, you know, if you take a photograph of it, at least you can capture that moment and look back at that and go, oh yes, I remember there was a spot of light here hitting this certain area, or, you know, another particular area, and you can put those in there based off of that photo reference. And again, as the light changes, and it does, it will change every 7 minutes, you're going to have a brand new scene in front of you as far as how the lighting goes. So you're going to want to maybe take several photos, because there might be particular areas of, you know, the way the sunlight's hitting certain areas that you like, that you didn't notice before. So you want to capture that, and perhaps you're not in a position at that particular time to paint those light areas in just yet. You know, you could be in the middle of working on a dark spot, you know, darker area, shaded area, and you're not ready to switch your brush over, or maybe you don't have another brush to put in the light area, or just maybe you don't have the right color on your palette yet. So for that reason, you're going to want to take a photograph of that, and you can reference that at a later time. So that way you can always put in those spots and those areas that really intrigue you. Now, I'm putting in this tree here that's kind of in a diagonal to the left over the falls. Now, that tree does exist in real life. And when I put that in there, I was thinking that it needed it to be in there because I was going to kind of use that to frame that waterfall a little bit. And you're going to see I will change my mind later and realize that that tree almost is a distraction. And I end up actually removing that. And here I am putting in all the greenery in the forest there, and I'm using a fan brush. And you'll notice that I'm taking that fan brush and I'm using it in all the different angles. I'm turning the fan brush and twisting the fan brush, and I'm just dabbing it in different all the different sides. I'm using the very edges of it. I'm using the straight edge on the front, and then I twist it, and then I'm using it upside down. I'm using it sideways. I'm not hitting the canvas in any one fashion continuously. I'm always constantly changing up. And not only am I just changing up the position of the brush hairs as they're hitting the canvas, I'm also changing the colors that I'm using. Every time you see my hand move away from the canvas and go to my palette, I'm actually changing the color that I'm using on my brush before I hit that canvas. So here I'm using darker green, and then the next time I move away, I might go back over that with a lighter green. Or I may use that same green, but I won't use it in the same spot. I'll use it in a different spot. So I'm constantly varying this brush and all the different edges of that brush all over this painting. And that's what's going to give me the detail that actually looks like leaves from the trees on this painting. It really works very well. Now, the particular fan brush that I'm using here happens to be a Monarch fan brush from Winsor & Newton, and that is using right here, and you can see it's got it's a little stiff, and it has a lot of different spaces in between all the different hairs of the brush, and that really makes a difference on how that creates all those different effects onto the canvas. So as I continued with this, I just kept going back and forth until I was comfortable with the amount of foliage that I had in that forest area. And you'll notice that I'll go back and forth between putting in lights and darks, and some of those sky holes that I already put in there, I will actually change those. I'll make some go away. I'll add some in a different spot. I'm constantly looking at the painting and just looking at the composition of things. You know, like, okay, sky hole, you might think, well, you know, does it really matter where you put the sky hole? And in a sense it doesn't, but in the same sense it does. So like, you can put a sky hole in between the trees there, and when I say sky hole, I'm talking about when you look at a tree, there's never ever just a canvas of green. There's always areas where light comes through from the background or the sun, and those create those sky holes. And when you put those sky holes in there, it really gives the effect of trees, and it gives it that three-dimensional effect. So I think sky holes are important, but there are some things that you want to keep in mind when you're doing them. When you do a sky hole, you're going to want to make sure that the color that you're using is slightly darker than the sky itself. Like if you have an area above your canvas that's light blue, your sky hole is going to be a darker color than that light blue, and it just helps to know that when you're putting them in there. And they're not, your sky holes are never usually very big, and so you can place them around. But when you're done putting your sky holes in there, I think you should step back from your painting and actually take a look at it and see that, you know, how does it really look? Do they look like, I mean, do you have like a pattern, like a straight line going across? Or, you know what I'm saying? You want to make sure that things aren't duplicated in a way that it becomes noticeable. So remember I was talking about that tree going across there. Here I was actually using the foliage to actually make that tree disappear. So I have that trunk at the bottom there. I'll have to make that go away. But yeah, I just thought that that whole, you know, branch, big trunk of the tree and the branches coming up and right in a diagonal was more of a distraction than anything at all. So I actually made that go away. You can still see the shadow where it was, but eventually I'll cover that with more paint and it'll be gone. So here you can see I just painted that trunk at the bottom, and so now it's almost as if that tree didn't exist there, but it is there in real life, but I just chose to get rid of that. And same with these rocks at the bottom. I wanted to change those up a little bit. There was that area there was more of an open area where I think water would flow. And also with this waterfall, in real life, these rocks are at an angle, and they kind of I don't know what the angle degree is that they are, but they're on a slant. So when you're looking straight on it, it would almost look like, you know, they're just crooked, like you couldn't walk on them evenly. And like if it was a cold day and these were icy, you would slide right off one edge of these rocks because of the angle that they're on. In this painting, I chose to get rid of that angle. So those rocks are going kind of straight across, and that was a decision that I also made to just kind of help the composition of the painting itself. I felt that it just created too much of a distraction, and it caused the viewer to kind of look at the waterfalls in a way that just didn't work for me. So here I am putting more darker areas, really trying to make where that tree branch, that tree that I put in there at an angle, you know, I didn't want any more of that to be there. I didn't want you to be able to see that it had existed in an earlier time. So I made sure I covered it with more paint, and so I made sure I covered that with more paint, and I put it, it's pretty much gone at this point. And here I am covering some more rocks, getting rid of those. I did have quite a few, a little group of little rocks in there, and I got rid of all those. Kind of got, made that area a little bit more open. And here I am adding some rocks to the side of this big rock, just so it's not sitting there all by itself. These are just little changes that I was making as I'm going along. Things that I felt were, like I said, just worked with the composition that I had in front of me. And again, I am looking at the photograph that I had taken, and some of these elements are in the photograph, and some of them don't exist at all, and I'm just putting them in there and just using, you know, whatever experience I've acquired over the years as far as painting rocks and stuff to add those in. And that comes with time, comes with practice. It's something that you know, you definitely want to you know, take your time with, and all these things come together as you're, like I said, you know, you step back from your painting and you can look at it and see what's working and what's not. You know, if you don't want to get bogged down in the details, and that's something you have to really pay attention to, like how many branches do you put in the painting? You know, it's like you want to make sure, like I said, you want to make sure you get those sky holes in there, but it's also very important to have those shaded areas in the background as well, because that's what gives the three-dimensional look of the branches of the trees. If you don't have those dark areas behind those branches, then the painting is going to look flat. The trees won't look real, and you'll just have a really flat two-dimensional look to it, and it won't show any interest, and that's kind of important. So here I am putting in some water, and I knew that I wanted more water than what was actually there in front of me in real life. So this was, you know, what I was just doing off the top of my head. And if you'll notice here, in real life, these rocks formed like these multitude of steps. So, you know, you got that first tier, then a second tier, then a third tier, then a fourth tier, then a fifth tier, and I put the waterfall in there based off of those rocks that do kind of exist in real life. However, after standing back and looking at this, I realized that it was kind of a monotonous look. Remember, I was talking about, you got to step back and look at, you know, patterns. Are you repeating things that are the same throughout your painting and causing it's not that's going to be distracting from the eyeballs, but you'll notice those patterns right off of the top when you're looking, and it becomes looking repetitious. And even if it's like that in real life, you definitely want to change that up. So here I am putting in a mixture of titanium white and cerulean blue is what I used for the watercolor. And I knew I wanted it lighter, but I also needed some shadow areas in there. And I had a difficult time putting those shadow areas in while I was doing this painting. In fact, I was going to have to wait for what I had painted on those rocks to dry a little bit, because as I was trying to paint the waterfall in there, it was mixing with the color underneath, and my water was actually becoming very muddy looking. The other thing that wasn't working very well with this waterfall is not only was like I said, I wanted to put my light areas in there, and I needed some shadow areas in there. You'll notice when I do this, it gives the effect almost like, instead of water rushing over rocks, it almost looks like icing on, like if you put icing on a warm cake and then it drips down over the sides and you have multiple runs along the side of the cake. That's almost how this ended up looking. And it was very repetitive, and it was happening on several different layers, kind of like a wedding cake. And the more I looked at it, the more I didn't like it. So again, I was going to have to change that. And so you'll see when I do that, and I'll go through that whole process of what I did. So I kept working on the rocks, and notice now this area here where I had a whole bunch of little rocks is now an open area where I can have water flowing off of that bottom tier onto these flat rocks. And I wanted to give that effect of like there was like like that rock, that could be shiny, and then it kind of dumped into a deeper area on the left there. So here I waited for that to dry, and I'm going back in over the top of it, and this is kind of where I really started getting that that icing on the cake effect. And as I kept looking at it, I realized it wasn't working. And you'll notice it here. It did look, it looked fine as far as, it gave an effect of water, but it didn't look like moving water. Like I said, it looked more like icing on a cake, just kind of like dripping over the side. And I would prefer that it looked like water instead of that. So this whole scene that you're looking at right in front of you now of this waterfall, it won't even exist by the end of this painting. I just go over the whole thing and redo it. Here's where I was trying to make that rock kind of look like water was running off of it into that deeper area on the left, the bottom left. Yeah, and don't be afraid to use your finger like I'm using there. Sometimes when I'm finished working on a painting, I'll look at the tips of my fingers, and I'll have different colors on the tips of my fingers. And there are people out there that'll say, "Oh my God, you got, oil paints are toxic." And yes, some of the oil paints do have some toxic elements to them based on what they use to make those particular colors. Like the cadmiums are, they're toxic because cadmium itself is a toxic metal. I'm going to tell you right now, you would have to literally eat a ton of this paint to really hurt you. Getting it on your skin, and as long as you wash your hands when you're done, regular soap takes the oil paint right off your skin, and as long as you wash your hands, you'll be fine. There's really no need to be overly concerned about something hurting you, unless of course some people have a sensitivity to things, and if you are already sensitive to things like that, then yeah, I would be concerned. Just to be on the safe side, always wear some rubber gloves, and you don't have to worry about it at all. But all in all, I'd say you'd be all right with oil paints. They're not gonna affect you in any way, shape, or form if it gets on your skin, for that brief moment. So the one aspect that I did like that I added here was that waterfall at the very top. That was like, I don't even think that rock on the top in reality goes that high. I added some water in there to kind of make it look like that waterfall was higher than what it really is, and I really liked the way that looked, so I ended up keeping that there. And here you can see what I was really talking about, how it gave that icing look on a cake, on the different layers, and you can really see it. It really shows here. And I thought I was gonna, I figured, well, if I added that little trail of water on the right, that it would kind of, make it look a little different, and it does, but it really ended up, again, just being a distraction. You end up, when you're looking at the painting, when you stand away from it, that little area on the right just drew your eye, and that's not where I wanted your eye to go. The focal point is that glowing area in the back behind that big rock. That's the focal point of the painting. That's where your eye should be going initially. So I knew I had to change the values of that waterfall, so it wasn't competing with that focal point in the background. And I also knew I had to change the way the waterfall actually looked. So here I am putting in some more darker shaded areas in between the branches. And like I said, it's very important to have that in there because it really gives that three-dimensional effect. Kind of makes the if you put a darker shaded area and then put like a neutral, not a neutral, but a middle value of whatever your color is you're using of your leaves over the top of that shaded area, and then touch it with your lightest value on the tips of those leaves, it really makes that branch pop, and it looks like it's like jutting out from wherever the trunk of that tree is, and it gives that really nice effect. The colors that I'm using on my palette, they didn't vary too much throughout the whole process of this painting. I had the titanium white, I had cadmium yellow, I had lemon yellow, and for that really light area I was using the lead tin yellow color that I like to use for highlights. And the green was permanent yellow green, and I had some cadmium red, and I had some quinacridone magenta, and I used quinacridone magenta instead of alizarin crimson, but sometimes I will go back to alizarin crimson. I really do enjoy using that color. Alizarin crimson is a great color. Right now there's I wouldn't say controversy, but a lot of people are talking about, a lot of artists are talking about how alizarin crimson isn't a permanent color, and so they do make a permanent alizarin crimson, and I'm not 100% sure just what the difference is between the permanent color and the non-permanent color. It's something I'll have to research before I make a switch to it, but I do like to use alizarin crimson from time to time. But in this case I didn't. I was using quinacridone magenta, and that is a great color to use to intermix with other colors. It really makes for a nice mixture. The blues, I did use cerulean blue for my cool blue, and I was using ultramarine blue for my warm blue. And I had some Payne's Gray, I had some Asphaltum, and then Ivory Black. And that's pretty much the colors that I used throughout this whole painting. I did not have any yellow ochre on the palette while I was working in the studio on this painting. Now, I did use yellow ochre when I was painting onto this canvas during the plein air session of this particular painting, but I did not use it in the studio. And that was just a choice. I could have put it on the palette, I just didn't, and worked quite well without it. I mean, I have, the cadmium yellow and the lemon yellow, and I have my earth tones, my asphaltum, and between those colors I can make a color very similar to yellow ochre. So if I needed the yellow ochre color, I could have mixed it. So here I am going back over that foliage. Now the foliage I kept hitting throughout this whole process. Some areas needed to be the foliage needed to be diminished a little bit, and then in some other areas I wanted the foliage to be a bit more fuller. So I would just go back and forth adding those different areas, and same with those rocks on the the waterfall itself. Some of those areas I would go in, I would darken them up, other areas I would lighten up. Here I was actually taking some gray, Payne's gray actually, and I was hitting some of those rocks with that Payne's gray, just to kind of add some variation in the colors there. And I really liked the way that looked, and so I stuck with that. And again, I went in and darkened up a lot of the shaded areas to kind of give those rocks a three-dimensional look. For the darker trunks of the trees in the background, that is really just a mixture of asphaltum and ivory black, and just taking a brush and going straight up. And actually, I shouldn't say straight up. I do wiggle the brush a little bit. I don't really care to have my trees to be perfectly straight. I do like to have some sort of movement in the branches. And when I say movement, I don't mean like it looks like it's actually moving. I do like to have it so it doesn't look like it grew completely straight. There are some squiggles and wiggles and whatnot. And then of course you go back over them and highlight one side of the trunk area and kind of give it that make that three-dimensional pop. Kept working on that large rock in the foreground there. I wanted to make sure that it stood out on its own. Now here you can see I am erasing, and when I say erase, I'm actually painting over that little area waterfall that trickle of waterfall that I had put on the right hand side. So I'm just going back over those rocks, putting in the dark areas back, and covering over the light areas and kind of making that go away, because I was going to change that. I decided at that point it was not a good look for the composition, so I made it go away. And that's the beauty of oil paint. You're never ever stuck with whatever it is you painted. I guess it's true with really if you're an acrylic painter, it would be the same thing. You could paint over acrylics with whatever you wanted, and you're never truly stuck 100% with what you painted. The only time I would say that that's true would probably be with watercolor. I think if you go really super dark with watercolor, there's no way to make it go back. I suppose if you took like if you're using a gouache white and you went over the top of your dark colors, that you could then go paint back over that. But I'm not experienced enough with watercolors to say 100% for sure that would be effective. I am going to be doing some watercolors probably next month during the February challenge, and I really am looking forward to that challenge, where I'll be doing a figure painting, one figure painting every day for the month of February. And I highly recommend that anybody out there interested in doing that to join along with me and to go ahead and do the same thing. And I will have a link to a Facebook group below that you can join if you are going to do the February challenge, that you can post your paintings there. And it doesn't have to be paintings, it could be drawings, it could be watercolor, it could be, it doesn't have to be oil, it could be whatever. And but it does have to be the figure, and you don't have to necessarily do the challenge, let's say during the month of February, or really any month for that matter. If you're doing a figure painting and you want to put it on the group and show a picture of it, then that's what the group is for. to actually enjoy the figure painting. Now here's where I started to, I looked back at the waterfall and I said, you know what, something needs to change here. I got too much, the same thing going on, and I got 5 different levels there, and they all look very similar of that waterfall. So what I decided to do at this point was, I said, how about if I put some boulders in there in the middle and just kind of had the water going around the boulders and like maybe over the top of some of the rocks, and and then going down to those 2 tiers on the bottom. So that way it breaks it up, so doesn't look like a wedding cake, like the tiers of a cake anymore. And so that's what I did. That's what I'm doing here. So I painted in some rocks. I used some Payne's Gray, and I went in between using the asphaltum and the ivory black to put in the shaded areas. But I used the Payne's Gray, different variations of that with titanium white for my highlights. And then I went over the top of those rocks with that mixture of titanium white and cerulean blue for the water. And then I, kind of broke up that layered look. But then I still got caught in the same trap doing this that I had previously, but in a different way. And basically what ended up happening is I did put those boulders in there, which is not the same. It looked different than the layers of flat rocks that I had in there. However, I had water trickling over a boulder on the right, and I had water trickling over on a boulder on the left, and it looked like 2 eagle talons on the top of some rocks. So I got stuck doing a similar pattern, even though the rocks were different shapes. And these are things that you just got to be careful of. And I get caught in this all the time. I do it with the trees, the branches. I'll end up having branches all going in very similar directions, and I realize I have to mix that up, change it, have some branches falling down, have some branches that are broken, have some that are going in different directions, as far as because like I said, I don't want everything growing perfectly straight. And same with your rocks. You don't want all your rocks to look exactly the same size. You don't want them in a pattern, because true, you could argue the point and say, well, in life, these things exist. There are patterns, and you'll see them, but you probably don't want to put them in your painting just because they exist in real life. You want to change it up. You want to give interest to your painting. You want your painting to be unique. You want something to, when somebody's looking at your painting, you want them to see it in a way that, like in real life, we walk by stuff every day and we don't pay one attention to it. It just doesn't draw us to look at it. You want your painting to draw the viewer to look at it. And one of the best ways to do that is to create all these different various points of interest. And you can see here's what I'm talking about right here. You can see the eagle claw on the right, you can see the eagle claw on the left, and yeah, it just didn't work. So I will end up going over this again, but as I was painting it, I just didn't notice it. It happens. So that's why it's one of the best things to do. I do have a mirror set up behind me, so when I'm working on my painting, I can turn around and I can look in the mirror and I can actually see my painting in the mirror, and it'll be a complete reverse of what the painting actually is. And what it does is it gives you a fresh eye right away, because it's not what you've been looking at all day. And you will notice anything that sticks out right away. If it bothers you or draws your attention where it shouldn't, you will see it right away. So I highly recommend that if you have a mirror that you can set up behind you while you're painting, that you do that and utilize it. It really works out to your benefit, I think. And it's funny about this because I was looking at this painting even right after I was done doing this particular part of the waterfall. I still thought it looked pretty good, and it did, but just, you know, it really took like a whole day. Coming back to it, like the next day I looked at it and I went, oh yeah, no, this is not going to work. Sometimes you just have to step away or do something else and to see what's going on with your painting. Really give yourself a fresh eye. So here I am going in the next day, and I'm completely covering all the waterfall that I had done. And I actually eliminated those two tiers on the top. Well, no, I didn't eliminate them. I kept the two tiers on the top, but everything else from that point down was not tiered anymore. Everything was not tiered anymore. So I just covered it completely. And the colors I used were, again, the asphaltum and the ivory black for the shaded areas, and the Payne's gray I used with some titanium white in some areas, and then I changed that gray. I varied it using ivory black and titanium white for some other areas. I didn't want to keep the grays looking exactly the same, because we're talking about using rocks here, and rocks have all kinds of colors and textures to them, so you can vary that color quite a bit and it'll still look pretty natural. So I started going there with the cerulean blue and the titanium white mixture for the waterfall up top, and I did add a little bit of Payne's gray into that mixture as well, just to darken that, or to at least shade that water a bit, because again, as I had mentioned earlier, I did not want the waterfall to compete with the focal point that I had set up just above that large rock behind the waterfall. And you can actually see it now. Now that waterfall has been, it's gone, you can actually see that focal point is like that glowing in the background. It's really prominent now at this point, because there is no light colors anywhere else that are really competing with that. So it really makes it pop, and that is exactly what it was that I was going for. So I was very pleased with that effect. Now basically what I did here is I took that Payne's gray and I kind of put in where I wanted that waterfall to go. So you can see I have the waterfall at the top. It's hitting another layer, and then I have it just going over some different boulders. Like on the right hand side, that's going to be one long waterfall, and as opposed to the left, I'll have two smaller little steps, so kind of breaks that up so it doesn't look tiered anymore. However, I did keep that kind of that tier level on the top there. I didn't want to eliminate it completely because that was an effect of the waterfall that I did kind of like. So I kept it. And that was my prerogative. So here I am putting in the lighter areas of that waterfall. And then I'm just going to keep going back and forth between the light and the dark. Because when you're looking at a waterfall, you can actually see through a waterfall. And you can see the shaded areas of the rock underneath it. I mean, water is transparent, and so I wanted to make sure that I created that effect where you're actually looking through this water and you can kind of see what's going on behind it as well. And right there where I'm working right now, I wanted to put a boulder in the center between those two little areas, and so I'll be working on that, adding a rock in there, and going back and forth and putting in some light areas and dark areas, kind of make that rock stand out a little bit, so you can tell that there's a boulder there and that water's going around it. So the brushes that I'm using here, like this particular brush here is a very small round brush, and it's a Princeton Imperial brush, and not expensive. It's like a $13 brush, but it has just a very small tip to it. Yeah, it's maybe I don't even think it's a 1/4 inch in length, probably shorter than that even. And it's not a huge, it's like what size is that? It's a number 2. It's a fractional 2/0. So yeah, that's the size of that round brush. So it's very small, and I love using that for details. And then this particular brush here that I'm using is a Renaissance sable cat's tongue that had that brown handle. And then I'm jumping back and forth, and there's that little round brush again, and I go back and forth between the two. That cat's tongue was worked out really great for putting in those light areas of the waterfall. Now, cat's tongue is kind of an odd-shaped brush. It's it's almost like a filbert, and the very tip of the brush comes to a point, and so you can use it for some detailed work, and you can use it for some flat work. I do have a bunch of different cat tongue brushes sizes, and I do like using them. They work out great. Here I am putting in that highlight, or I'm sorry, not the highlight, the shaded area on the bottom of this rock, this boulder that I want the water to go around. And then at the top I was trying to put in some highlighted area to kind of make this rock stick out a little bit. So you'll notice I've actually given this waterfall a completely different look altogether as to its form and shape. It doesn't look anything like it did from the very beginning. It looks almost like a completely different waterfall at this point. But I was very happy with the way that it looked. I'll add some splashes down more towards the bottom, and it really gives that. It really gave the effect of running water. So I was kind of pleased with that. I don't have a lot of experience doing waterfalls. This is probably maybe the third waterfall I think I've ever painted. So to say I'm experienced at running water, I would say no, I'm not. So that's probably why I had a difficult time trying to get this waterfall to look as, to make it look right. Going back and forth with the composition of it, and getting trapped into the putting in those mimicking patterns and tiers, and I kept falling into these little pitfalls that I'm sure a lot of artists do when they're doing waterfalls. So it was just a matter, like I said, of taking a step back, giving yourself some time, really taking a look at the painting, looking at it with fresh eyes, and seeing, what was working and what wasn't working. So yeah, after like this is the third time I've actually redid this falls. I was finally happy with the result. I had to be careful here putting in these highlights so I did not fall into that earlier trap of having it look like icing coming down the edge of a cake or the side of a cake, and so I think I was able to stay away from that. And I had to go in there with my little tiny round brush there and put in some highlight areas and put in some dark areas, kind of accentuate the shaded cracks within the rocks, what was going on underneath the waterfalls. Again, bringing out that the shadows and the highlights of that large boulder in the foreground. Now I'm just kind of looking at the different details that need to, just kind of. I'm very close to the end of this painting, and now how to know when I'm at the end of a painting? It's just experience. You just have to really get to a point where you're like, okay, is there anything else that I could do to this painting that would enhance it or make it better? And really, you just take a look at it, and if there isn't, then you're done with it. You just have to say you're finished. Because really, you could keep going back and adding or taking away, and it gets to a point where the painting will get overworked, or you'll start muddying up your colors. So you really have to just know from experience, that you're done. There's times where I've done that. I've overworked the painting. Even I myself didn't know that I was done with the painting, and I just kept going with it. And so at this point, I knew I was getting close. I just had to, just decide where I was going to add some details and where I wasn't. I did want to thicken up some of the bottom of some of the stumps of the trees, not stumps, the trunks. Thicken up some trunks of the trees there that were coming out of the ground, so they didn't kind of look like just all straight sticks popping up. Tree trunks do have, a certain shape to it at the bottom where they come to the ground, so I wanted to thicken those up so you could see those. And at this point, I knew I was it's pretty much done with it. So yeah, if there's anything about this painting that you liked or didn't like, make sure you leave it below in the comments and let me know. And if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you're not a subscriber, I highly recommend that you hit the subscribe button and become a subscriber, and then you'll always know when I post new videos in the future. And I look forward to seeing you again.